Well, good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. Very warm welcome to you all. We're excited to have you here. Today, we'll be talking about how anti-fatigue mats reduce pain and discomfort, along with some tips and tools that you can take away to make sure you get the right mats every time. Our guest host today, Crystal Nelson. She's an ergonomist, an occupational therapist, and the owner of two ergonomic consultancies. That's Fargo Ergonomics and Alter Ergo. So Crystal, we're very thankful to have you with us today, and we're excited to learn from you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me here.
Just a couple of quick FYIs before I hand it over to Crystal to get started on her presentation. This is webinar 1 of a 5-part series that will be running throughout the summer, and that's from start to install, how to find and design and maintain the right anti-fatigue mats in your environments. So today we're talking about how anti-fatigue mats actually work. Next month, we'll be digging into ways to make sure you have the right materials for your environments. And the post-webinar email will include information on how to sign up for those upcoming sessions as well. Lastly, the post-webinar email will also include Crystal's information. So feel free to reach out to her directly if there's any questions we don't get to today or anything you'd like to discuss further directly with her. She'd be more than happy to connect. And as we go through today's session, feel free to put any questions in the Q&A box. We will have some time at the end to actually answer questions live here. If we run out of time, we'll get back to you with those answers as well, but feel free to fire away with questions. So with that, over to you, Crystal. I'll jump off of screen here and let you share your screen and jump into the presentation when you're ready. So thank you, and over to you.
All right, so today we'll be talking about how anti-fatigue mats work. So our agenda will include exploring physiological changes due to prolonged standing, discover the science behind how anti-fatigue mats work, review the role that anti-fatigue mats play in preventing an injury, and I'll have some final tips and takeaways for getting the right anti-fatigue mats. After our 15-minute or so presentation, there will be time for Q&A. So what does happen when we stand for too long? So I will give you that answer in just a moment. And I also wanted to point out that my presentation today is based off of all scientific research. So I'll add in some of my experience here and there, but everything has been researched and based off of scientific studies. So when we stand for too long, especially after 5 hours, some studies have found detrimental effects in long-lasting muscle fatigue, performance, discomfort, and vascular aspects. Other studies have found that if you stand for 3 or more hours, this shows clear detrimental effects. There's been some signs of ankle and foot discomfort, and prolonged standing can cause significant localized leg muscle fatigue, particularly in the gastrocnemius muscle. So that's our calf muscle in the back of our lower leg. With the 5 hours of standing, studies have found that if you rest for 30 minutes after that 5-hour period, you're no longer able to perceive the feelings of fatigue and you're able to carry on just as you were. And in ergonomics, that's a really good point, that with adequate rest, we're usually able to recover from fatigue and discomfort. Also, when we stand for too long, this can be attributed to varicose veins, especially in the lower extremities. So varicose veins are your superficial veins, oftentimes in our legs, and the valves end up functioning inefficiently, resulting in pooling of blood and painful swelling. And with deep veins, the problem is more serious and can cause blood to return along abnormal pathways, which leads to long-term health problems, including chronic edema, so that is swelling, and leg ulcers, which are sores that have a really tough time healing. So in our veins, we have these valves. So when the blood flows through, the valves open, and then when there's a pause in the blood flow, the valves are supposed to close. In varicose veins, what happens is the valve opens up partially or fully to allow the blood to flow, but then when it's supposed to close, it doesn't close all the way. So blood can flow back and forth and kind of pool within the vein itself. So here are just a couple of pictures of our vein and our artery. So our veins take blood to the heart, and our arteries move blood away from the heart. So next time you're sitting and you can hear your heartbeat, kind of makes that lub dub sound. The sound that you're hearing are the veins, or excuse me, the valves within your heart that are closing. So the different chambers take turns with pumping, going lub dub, lub dub. So think of your valves doing their job within your heart next time you're resting. Okay, also when we stand for too long, there's been some research as it relates to men and women. So there were 1.6 million people that were studied for 3 years in the 90s. And this study has been a bigger contributing factor to the differences with how men and women are designed with standing. So men are twice as likely to be experiencing a first hospitalization for varicose veins compared to all other men. And women who worked mostly in a standing position were 2.5 times at risk than all other women. When we stand for too long, there are some studies that have compared the prevalence of chronic venous diseases, especially for those in offices and industrial work settings. So those studies have found that the prevalence of the disorders increased with age. So naturally, with many other aspects and health conditions in our life, the older we get, the higher risk we are for experiencing that issue. And then with this study, controlling for age, so they eliminated that factor, or they contributed it to the results. They had found that the prevalence was higher in workers who stood for 50% of or more of their shifts. So if you have a chronic venous disease, your higher risk for obtaining that was 50% standing or more of your shift. So let's discuss more the role of anti-fatigue mats and what happens with each step that we take. So if you have gone out and done your own research about anti-fatigue mats, there are many articles, very easy to find articles that show just how much we as human beings enjoy anti-fatigue mats. So recent studies have found that there's a reduced perceived fatigue and discomfort. There's reductions in all measures of discomfort and fatigue. There's improvements of both comfort and fatigue, and so on and so forth. So we have found that anti-fatigue mats are beneficial and people like them, but understanding the science behind them is a little bit more difficult to find. So there are two main things that happen when you use an anti-fatigue mat. So one of the things that happens is when you're standing on an anti-fatigue mat, the anti-fatigue mat stimulates postural leg muscles. So those are the muscles that help us to maintain standing, especially in the lower legs. And when our muscles are activated, it helps to use our venous pump. So it helps to circulate the fluids throughout our bodies. So the muscles assist the veins in their job and help them to pump the blood and fluids from head to toe and back up again. And then another effect from standing on an anti-fatigue mat is an absorption of impact or the load and returning that energy to the foot when you are walking. So the low impact, high contact area and energy conserved will correlate with less pain and less fatigue. And then a high pressure contact will increase fatigue, and then you'll feel more tired. So in short, basically an anti-fatigue mat absorbs the shock when you're walking and creates a cushioning effect, and therefore reduces fatigue, and that fatigue can have a secondary effect and travel throughout your legs and sometimes your back too. There have been some other fun studies, which I think they're fun. I love research studies. If I could just read research and scientific studies in my free time all day, every day, I definitely would. So when I say fun, fun to me may be a different definition, and I get that. But so there's been other fun research studies on other soft floor coverings. So walking on a hard floor or like a concrete floor is very similar to the impact of a hammer pounding on the heel of every step. So with each step you take, imagine all of your body weight being directed to that one point in your heel, and then that weight transfers to your other foot. So there's a lot of weight that your body is supporting with each step. So wood, cork, carpeting, or rubber, anything that provides some elasticity is generally gentler on workers' feet. And more than that, softer floor coverings reduce fatigue and improve safety by reducing slips and falls on slippery floors. And this would be those floor coverings that are out of the walkways. And then specifically speaking about carpeting, there was a study that was done on carpet only, and our standing heart rate reduced by 5%, which is good because you don't want to have your heart working too hard and pumping too hard to keep your fluids circulating if it is not needed. Another study compared conventional mats to more commercial anti-fatigue mats. So a conventional mat would maybe be just a standard mat that you would be standing on, that it wouldn't be as soft to absorb the force of your movement. So a conventional mat, so a standard mat, gave our highest pressure recorded, and that's with a 0.15 megapascal. So this is a unit of pressure, oftentimes used in science and engineering. And then the study found that a commercial anti-fatigue mat gave our lowest value. So in terms, that meant that 55% of our body weight was absorbed by the anti-fatigue mat compared to a much lesser rating from a conventional mat. And then when you are shopping for an anti-fatigue mat, there are some great tips and areas to consider. You want to consider the amount of compression that the fatigue mat is showing. So the fatigue mat should have a 5.8% compression rate. This is perceived as more comfortable. And this was compared in this study to a 7.4% and 18.6% compression rate. So any of these compression rates were better than concrete. However, now we have our good, better, and best results of the 5.8%. And then when you're looking for an anti-fatigue mat, look for the following features: a compression rate of anywhere from 3 to 7% under adult weight. The underside of the mat should be constructed so the mat does not move on the floor. The edges should be beveled or angled to reduce tripping, and make sure you speak with an anti-fatigue mat consultant or expert to determine what the best mat surface is and the design for the given workspace. So you want to consider dirt, debris, oil, or any other elements that would be brought into that workplace. So these are all the tips and tricks and information I have for you about anti-fatigue mats and why they do what they do. This QR code will lead you to my YouTube page where I have weekly ergonomic tips and tricks for driving, holding your cell phone, and all other things we encounter in our workday. And at this time, I'm open to any questions you may have.
Excellent. Thank you, Crystal. That was a excellent presentation, very insightful. A lot of research has gone into that, so thank you for sharing. Perhaps, Crystal, if I have you just stop your screen share now, we'll just be on the video, and then I can read through the questions. Does that work?
Yes, wonderful.
Perfect. All right. So first question, looks like Cassandra has a question here. Has there been any study about these mats being too soft for our older generation, causing them pain in knees and hips? Do you have any insights onto that one?
Yes, there have been some studies on the softness. So when the mat is too soft, some of the studies are finding that our bodies have to work too hard to stay balanced while standing on the anti-fatigue mat. So our bodies are exerting extra energy to maintain that upright position. And sometimes with our joints, when they are unstable, people, depending on their natural anatomy and physiology, just may find that standing on that anti-fatigue mat is not comfortable because they're not getting that firm support that their body is looking for. So generally speaking, most people will know, they can listen to the cues that their body is sending to them if that anti-fatigue mat feels better or worse for their body.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I think that's always one of the challenges, isn't it? As we design matting for workplaces, is there's such a range of personnel involved in these areas, different shifts, different personnel coming through. So they may be needing to sort of isolate those particular individuals and then determine what's best to be done in that particular case.
Mm-hmm. And I can speak personally too, where I've stood on anti-fatigue mats that are too soft. And I have noticed, just because I'm more aware of what my body is doing, especially when I'm working, maybe not always outside of work, but I have experienced even some just ankle fatigue on some mats that are too squishy. And then I would check out the brand and see which one that was. It was never AcroMat though.
Well, thank you for that. That's good to know. I think that ties into one of the other questions we had about the recommended thicknesses of anti-fatigue mats, and from our point of view, we've done a lot of research on that. That's one of the reasons we don't offer super thick anti-fatigue mats, because you tend to get that walking in sand effect that does drag you down after a while. So we found that the 5/8 is the premium one that we have found for thickness. And I think Nick's got a question here. We typically recommend 9/16 or 5/8 as a guideline. Is there a general starting point? So I don't know if you have any more.
Yeah, I have, in the research studies, have seen everything from 3/8 to a 1/2 inch to 5/8. And that's what I see most frequently. The ones that are thinner just aren't providing the support that we need from an anti-fatigue mat. And the thicker ones become soft and even sometimes a tripping hazard just from stepping on and off the mat.
That's great. Thank you. Cassandra's followed up and said, what would be a good alternative for those that are finding an anti-fatigue mat too soft? Obviously, we can look at different types of matting, but you've probably got some insight into that.
Yeah, you can even look at other things too. If someone just isn't comfortable using an anti-fatigue mat, you can get shoe inserts that support the natural arches of that person's foot. You can get a footrest. So our bodies are made to move. So the slogan, sitting is the new smoking. It could be standing is the new smoking. You don't want to sit all day. You don't want to stand all day. You don't want to be in that one position all day. So if you have a 4-inch footrest for that person to just alternate their feet back and forth to rest on, that can help shift their weight as well. And also making sure that there's enough toe space so they can get close to their workstation, so they don't get too far away.
That's excellent. And that was going to be my final point on that question too, is somebody like Crystal would be able to assess an area like that and help an individual to get more comfortable in their workplace. You've had lots of experience. We've had other ergonomists talk on these webinars as well. And I always appreciate the amount of insight that you can actually bring to bear on any particular situation. So
absolutely. Even having just a chair or a modified chair for that person to sit on too. But again, as you mentioned, Russell, just looking at their work tasks would be most beneficial to find that best result.
Very good. Thank you for that. Mike's asking about listed pressure rating and durometer of the mat. I think we can follow that one up with you, Mike. And I know Rich has got some information on that. He can share about the durometers too. So any other questions from the audience? I think we've got one here that came in ahead of time we can touch on quickly from Samantha. What solutions do you recommend if anti-fatigue mats are not an option? I know you've just mentioned a couple, like the chairs and the footrests. Any other top tips you want to share on that?
Yeah, the most important thing anybody can do in their workday if they are starting to feel fatigue is to rest in some way, shape, or form. So that could be either doing light duty activities instead of heavy duty, stopping to get yourself in a different position. So taking time to do a 1 or 2 minute stretch, just walking around the workplace, so you're stimulating a different set of muscles. All of those tasks can be, or rest breaks, technically speaking, could be incorporated into the workday, so you aren't stuck in that one position. And that's where we usually start to feel fatigue, is when we are stuck in one position and aren't moving and aren't active.
Very good. Thank you for that. Christopher has another great question here. Just came in. Would a combination of controls such as footwear inserts and anti-fatigue mats for workers be beneficial? Or would this create other ergonomic issues? So great question.
Yeah, that is a really good question, because sometimes less is more. But absolutely, I highly recommend a good supportive shoe to go along with an anti-fatigue mat, because that person isn't always standing on the anti-fatigue mat. Sometimes work boots, depending on the brand, don't always have a good shoe insert to begin with. So going to a shoe store, or I know a local company of ours, Shields, they have shoe inserts or orthotics that can be placed into the boot to make sure that that person is getting the support they need from maybe a shoe that wasn't well designed to start with, or just doesn't fit that person.
That's good. I think that's really helpful because, I mean, I know for myself, you can always tell when your shoes need replacing. It's just like flipping a switch for me. All of a sudden, I need new shoes. So I think that's really helpful, that you do need to make sure that the footwear piece is maintained properly as well, because a mat's going to help, but it's not going to replace a good pair of footwear. And then we always talk about it too, that there are areas or instances where an anti-fatigue mat is either impractical or unsafe. So we want to be mindful of that too. And then making sure you have some sort of alternative arrangement for that, whether it be an insert or a shoe program or something that can help address those areas too. And then I guess my last point on that is, we often hear feedback from our clients that once the correct mat, especially the correct shape and size, is deployed, the right mat for the application, it's amazing how much more people enjoy standing and working in those areas than previous types of solutions. So
yes, I see that often when I'm doing ergonomic assessments. There will be other thin mats stacked on top of one another, which don't do that. That's not an idea. And once they try AcroMat, so AcroMat is a company I'm not affiliated with any way, shape, or form, but I do really like the product, and I do feel there are some great outcomes that people experience with a good quality mat compared to those maybe lesser quality ones.